and reasoning. Yeah, might be a good idea. Okay. Logic and reasoning. Now, we talked about logic with persuasion. Logic involves finding evidence to support what you're claiming, okay? But there's more involved in logic. Okay, your textbook's the chapter actually starts with a quote from Alice in Wonderland. Contrariwise, continued Tweedledee, if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be, but as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic.
What?
I know.
I don't even know.
It's taken from this section of Alice in Wonderland. I know what you're thinking about, said Tweedledum, but it isn't so, no how. Contrariwise, continued Tweedledee, if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be, but as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic. I was thinking, Alice said politely, which is the best way out of this wood? It's getting so dark. Would you tell me, please? Is there any logic in what Tweedledee was saying? No. You all were like confused. And yeah, no, not a lot. So, guys, I know that's a very kind of silly way to start a section on logic, but at the same time, we want to understand that logic is all about thinking clearly, methodically, step by step. You know usually when something sounds logical or not. It makes sense. This didn't make sense. It's not logical. Logic is all about, like I said, taking things in an orderly, methodical fashion, thinking them through step by step sometimes, okay? And deciding whether something is accurate or not. We do logic and reasoning for a couple of reasons. One, so you can be better prepared in persuasion and debate when we get to debate. But two, so that you can also start to identify when someone is not being logical. And we call those logic fallacies, okay? You want to be able to recognize logic fallacies. Now, I'm going to tell you, I will not expect you by the end of the year to be able to say, oh, this is this particular logic fallacy. You might be able to recognize some of them, but what I do want you to be able to do is recognize that the logic or the reasoning was faulty. That's what we mean by a fallacy, okay? But to understand the fallacies, we have to understand logic first. And there are two types of logic or reasoning. There is inductive and there is deductive, okay? So we have inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. What do they mean? Well, it says in mathematics, a technique exists for proving theorems in which the mathematician uses certain specific cases to help prove a general truth. You've done this in math, right? Geometry, you have to prove theorems. Are any of you in trig or have taken trigonometry?
Are we taking?
I'm not going to ask you to turn them in now. Tell you what I'll do. Here's what I'll do, guys. I think I can save these. I need to make sure they're available to you so you can follow along with them. Take your own notes if you prefer doing that. I'll also put some in place for you, okay? So that they're available. They're also in your textbook, all right? So let's back up a minute. So reasoning or logic, reasoning is the process of thinking and drawing conclusions about evidence. That's what we want to think about, evidence and reasoning. Evidence, of course, is anything that establishes a fact or gives us a reason to believe something. Like in Kylie's speech, she's talking about DUIs and the expense of them. And one of her reasons was we need to not, one of the reasons why we shouldn't drink and drive is it's expensive if you get a DUI. And she gave us what the cost of a DUI could possibly be. That would be the evidence, the cost of it. Or percentages telling what are your chances, how far do your chances go, how more likely are you to have an accident if you are drinking and driving. If you drink this much alcohol, your percentage of having an accident gets higher, and you talk about those things. That would be evidence, of course. Reasoning is the process of thinking and drawing conclusions about that evidence, okay? So we do that in a couple of ways. The inductive reasoning is going from using certain specific cases to help you draw a general truth. We call that induction. It's anybody who argues from a specific to a general idea, okay? So inductive reasoning, and I know this isn't easy to comprehend because it almost sounds, when we talk about deductive, it almost sounds the same way, just said a different way, and it is sort of, okay, sorry. So we're going specific to general. So we look at specific things, okay? Think of Sherlock Holmes looking at the evidence to draw a conclusion, okay? Reasoning, that's called reasoning by sign. We look at, you do, how many of you have taken the bio, what's the bio class where you look at evidence and biomed? Okay, have any of you taken biomed? Some of you have? Yeah, you're doing inductive reasoning because you're looking at evidence, right? And you're drawing a conclusion. Am I right? Okay, that would be inductive reasoning. Reasoning by sign. Is one example of this. We look at specific evidence and we draw a conclusion. Or make an inference, okay? So we have reasoning by sign, that is a type of it. Reasoning by analogy is another type. An analogy is an illustration in which the characteristics of a familiar object or event are used to explain or describe the characteristics of a less familiar object or event. So in reasoning, you can do that this way. You can say, it says that analogies are used by the creators of standardized tests to measure intelligence. For example, hand is to person as tree is to sky, dirty is to laundry, foot is to powder, paw is to dog. The point of the test is not to make you blind from filling out thousands of tiny bubbles, but to see if you can pick out similarities. So reasoning by analogy is where you're using similarities to draw a conclusion, okay? I don't know what they're watching.
They always watch something. Something a little bit crazy.
So when you're reasoning by analogy, you look for similarities in things to make a comparison and draw a conclusion, okay? It says when you reason by analogy, you demonstrate similarities as you develop an argument. Suppose that a particular food is found to cause cancer in white rats. You might then reason by analogy that there is some risk to humans as well, okay? So that would be reasoning by analogy. You're saying, well, this particular thing causes cancer in rats. It is very possible because of this, that it's why we use animal testing. It could possibly have this effect on humans as well. So you're drawing those similarities, okay? That's what reasoning by analogy is. It says because no two set of conditions are exactly alike, though the perfect analogy doesn't exist. It says white rats rarely guzzle soda as they gorge themselves on tortilla chips. So, you know, which can cause, we are eating the wrong things, we can lead to a higher risk of cancer. says, therefore, you should not rely entirely on an analogy to prove your position in any speech and should always supplement your arguments with other forms of proof. So you can use an analogy, but it shouldn't be your only form of proof. So one of the reasons why we talk about these things is for you to think about making good, strong arguments, okay? And for you to identify if somebody else is making a good, strong argument. So this one, we're using evidence, reasoning by sign. We use evidence to prove our point. This one, we're looking for similarities to prove our point, okay? Then we have deductive reasoning. And deductive reasoning is kind of the opposite of inductive. With deductive reasoning, we go from generalizations to a specific instance, okay? So here we're going from the specific to the general. Deductive, we're going from the general to the specific. And we do that using terms like syllogisms and premises, okay? Anybody ever heard those terms before? Okay, so a premise are the statements on which the reasoning is based, okay? Let me find a good definition. Let me see if we have a better definition of premise. This doesn't define it very well. A premise is like a general statement, like, oh, I'm in the Spanish version. Sorry. Did you know that your the textbook has a?
Just translate it.
I can't. I'm sorry. I cannot. Okay. All right. So they just define it as an assertion that serves as the basis for argument. And yes, that's what a premise is. But a premise is also, to give you an example, you might start with, there are usually statements like, all teenagers are reckless. And then we have something called syllogisms that we take it, or, yeah, okay. So then we would say the next, it's like a reason, an argument that we're making. All teens are reckless. You, here's the specific, you are a teen, or you are a teen. Yeah. Therefore, the very specific conclusion we draw, therefore, you are reckless. Now, there are problems with all of that, but I'm just using this as an example. So this is the premise. These are the syllogisms, okay? There's the first syllogism, because you are a teen. It's like an observation, okay? The premise is all teens are reckless. Here's my observation. You are a teen. Here's my conclusion. Therefore, you are reckless. Now, is that true? Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
Are all teens reckless?
Yeah, every single one of them.
No.
Yeah.
No, they are not. They are not. But you are seeing what I mean as far as we go from we start with a general idea, general premise. We're looking at a group of things, okay? White rats white rats develop cancer from this, okay? This is a white rat, therefore it will develop cancer if it eats this, okay? There would be the syllogism. I started to say you are a white rat, but that's not right. Okay. So here's another one. This one isn't really accurate anymore, or sort of. It depends on your definition. All students go to school. Let's look at this one. All students go to school.
Yeah.
You are a student. Therefore, you go to school. Okay, that is a more accurate thing than all teens are reckless. All right, this one would be an accurate statement. If you're a student, then yes, by definition, you are going to school. Whether you're going to school online or you're going to school in person, you're going to school of some kind. Okay, so you are a student, therefore you go to school, right? Okay. So that's called a, this is actually called the syllogism, the whole thing, okay? So you've got a premise, two premises. You start with a big general premise, you start with a slightly smaller premise, and then you draw a conclusion, okay? So it's two premises, a conclusion makes up a syllogism, all right? So, let's do another one. It says, suppose that you're preparing a speech in which you plan to argue. Well, it says that deductive reasoning is not always this straightforward. For example, let's look at the role of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. Their task is to try to apply a set of widely accepted principles or premises, the Constitution, to specific cases. However, it is often difficult to tell whether the principles actually apply. Therefore, the justices must reason from the general principles to the specific cases to decide if the cases are valid. Suppose that you are preparing a speech in which you plan to argue that flag burning should be allowed. By using deductive reasoning, you can develop an argument based on the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The First Amendment is a general principle that is supposed to protect free expression. But does burning the flag count as expression? If it does, then you could invoke the First Amendment and by deduction conclude that flag burning is legal as follows. The First Amendment says to allow all types of expression. Flag burning is a type of expression, therefore flag burning should be allowed. Of course, the premise that states that flag burning is a form of expression must be true if listeners are to accept the argument in your speech. But there's the rub. Here's the thing. You have to determine if that is true or not when you're arguing a case like that. Okay, is that accepted as truth? That's what the Supreme Court justices have to do. They have to figure out if this particular rule applies or this premise. Okay, so guys, we have this. We understand. And for some reason, it's easier for me to explain the logic fallacies than it is to explain the logic in the first place. I don't know why. And that really doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is easier for me to explain the logic fallacies. But inductive reasoning takes us from specific to a general idea. Deductive reasoning takes us from a general to a specific conclusion, okay? So specific to general conclusion, general to specific conclusion. I'm going to pull up a new page. Okay, so logic fallacies are errors in reasoning or mistaken beliefs, okay? There are many, many, many logic fallacies. These are errors in reasoning. They can also be mistaken beliefs. One error in reasoning, one logic fallacy would be the idea that all teenagers are reckless. That's an absolute. And usually if somebody's claiming absolutes, it's probably not good reasoning, because very rarely do we deal in absolutes. Meaning that everyone, if you hear everyone or everybody or all or no one or never, those are absolutes. And they're usually fallacies. Okay, so fallacies will weaken your credibility as a speaker, or it should weaken your credibility as a speaker. Okay, I'm just going to say it should, because I'm going to tell you, politics, the last 15, 20 years, all I hear are logic fallacies all over the place. I don't care which side of the aisle, meaning which party. Logic fallacy after logic fallacy, and yet people believe all of them. And I'm like, I'm gonna tear my hair out. Okay, sorry, that's my little.
Run for president.
Oh my good Lord, I'm not really sure I should be president, or that I would win either. Yeah. Once in a while, that thought crosses my mind, and I'm like, no. I don't believe that I am qualified to be president.
Why not? School teacher at Knox High School.
Yes, and I am a smart and intelligent person. However, there are a lot of decisions and things that have to be made that I don't know enough about foreign policy, about, all this. Yeah. What?
But I mean, you have people that will suggest stuff for you.
Yes, but I don't know enough to who to listen to.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, well, if they give you scenarios and you can think about.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yourself.
I don't know. Okay, so guys, we're going to talk about some more common fallacies. There are many others that we will talk about too, and we're actually going to do a project and create advertisements using logic fallacies.
Like those?
No, that was theater arts class. Okay, so the first one is called a hasty generalization. Oops. Generalization. There we go. A hasty generalization means that the error occurs because the sample that's chosen is too small or is in some way not representative. Okay, so the conclusion that is drawn is not valid. Here's what I mean. You have 150 television stations to choose from. You're flipping through 3 of them and see only commercials, and you give up after 3 out of 150 and say there's nothing on but commercials. Okay? Now, you have sampled way too few. That's too little of a sample. That is a hasty generalization. You're in math class for one day, you don't get what's being talked about. You're like, I can't do this, I don't understand math at all. Okay? That is also a hasty generalization. You have not given it time. You need to give it at least a few weeks, maybe a month or 2, before you can decide if you are completely, are never going to be a mathematician. All right? I'm trying to think of another way that I could tell you that. Okay, so here's one of the ways to use and make sure you're not using a hasty generalization. We're looking for evidence to support something in a speech, okay? You're doing a persuasive speech or you're doing a debate. You need to look for, if you're looking for a study of something, you need to look, how many people did they sample? How many people did they question or put in their study? The more people that are in the study, are in the questions, the more accurate or valid the study would be. If they only talk to 10 people let's say you ask 10 students here at Knox High School something, and then you draw a conclusion from the 10 people you talked to. That's a hasty generalization. You haven't sampled enough. You would either need to sample at least 100 students and make sure that they're both male and female, and try to do a variety of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of our different types of students that we have, but at least 100 students, both male and female, before you could get a more accurate decision there on whatever it is that you're polling them on, okay? Political polls. There's a lot of that going on. They talk about, if you listen to any of the news, they say, well, in this poll, so-and-so's ahead, or in this poll, this person's ahead. Well, to know which poll to really consider, you have to be looking at how many people have they polled, how did they poll them, was it an unbiased poll, were they talking only to, people of one particular age group or one particular part of the country, or did they take it, they need a bigger sampling, okay? If they don't, if they only talk to, let's say they say, well, President Trump is 30 points ahead, and according to this poll, but they only polled Trump supporters of a certain age in a certain part of the country. It's not an accurate poll. Same thing if they've got saying Biden is ahead by 30 points, but they only polled Biden supporters, okay? So you have to look at a bigger pool of people. Do you get that? Okay. Otherwise, it's a hasty generalization. You didn't look at a big enough part of it. Then we have false premise. I already gave you an example of a false premise. I said all teens are reckless. That is a false premise, okay? It's an error in deduction. For example, parents like to tell their children, all teenagers are irresponsible. You are a teenager, therefore you are not responsible enough to leave the house tonight. Parents ever tell you that? You are not responsible enough to leave the house tonight. No, don't get that. Okay. It says, now study the example to find the premise based on a hasty generalization. Although it may be true that you are an incorrigible slacker, the premise that all teenagers are irresponsible is false. Of course, if you choose to argue the fine points of logic with your parents, they might choose to restrict your opportunity to watch all those commercials on television. All cats have 4 legs. I have 4 legs, therefore I am a cat. This is a dog thinking this.
Dogs can talk.
Oh no, he was thinking it. I must be a cat. I have 4 legs. A cow could say that. I have 4 legs. All cats have 4 legs. It's a false premise, a hasty sorry, I said a hasty generalization. It's a false premise, okay? So your first part of it turns out wrong. Was that the end of the period? It was, wasn't it? Okay, we'll talk about more logic fallacies tomorrow. And we won't, I may introduce your project, but before we're done on Thursday, but
is it like group projects?
yeah, it'll be a group project. So we'll have to work on it when we come back from break, probably. We might get it, we'll probably get it started, but okay, guys, the bell just rang. So you are free to go. I didn't mark Heidi absent.